Good morning and welcome to day 11 of our series. Today's topic is consciousness. David Chalmers, who's an Australian philosopher and cognitive scientist, said, "Consciousness poses the most baffling problems in the science of the mind. There is nothing we know more intimately than conscious experience, but there is nothing that is harder to explain." Now, as we're going along, the word conscious should not be confused with the word conscious. Conscious is having an awareness of one's environment and one's own existence, sensations, and thoughts. Consciousness, then, is the quality or state of being aware, especially of something within oneself. Conscious is an awareness of morality in regards to one's behavior. It's a sense of right and wrong that urges one to act morally. Human consciousness is not the same as conscience. 1 Timothy 4:2 and 1 Samuel 25:31 bears this out. The conscious is one narrow part of consciousness. The conscious is a God-given emotional reaction to conflict between our values and our thoughts and actions. Psychologically speaking, consciousness is defined as the awareness of the outside world and of one's own mental processes, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. To be conscious is to be aware. It's the general term for a person's thoughts, emotions, sensations, and general awareness. It is sometimes referred to as human consciousness. Scripture does not explicitly define what human consciousness is, though the Bible provides perspectives on it. However, defining human consciousness is notoriously difficult. When exploring consciousness, it means that we'll be probing the deepest questions about what it means to be human. Such a discussion typically involves a long list of mysteries and dilemmas. Some of these concepts are unresolved, others present competing and apparently contradicting truths. The Bible gives us practical ways to understand some such issues. On other details, Scripture is silent, and we're left to untangle questions on our own. The scope of consciousness goes from coma to alert wakefulness. In between, you'll find deep sleep, meditation, hypnosis. Consciousness is on a continuum from active, awake, alert, to passive. The most passive is coma. There's no activity at all. In active states, you intentionally direct and manipulate mental activity. In a passive state, your mind will wander and it allows various mental processes to come to mind. Most often, we are in a waking state. Attention and arousal will dictate mental processes reaching awareness at any given moment. Now, not only is there a scope of consciousness, there are also levels of consciousness. At the conscious level, mental activities and events, these are things that you are currently aware of. The unconscious level is mental events that cannot be experienced consciously. Cognitive unconsciousness is the mental activities that are not conscious, but either can become conscious or influence conscious experience. So we have total awareness, no awareness, and in between those, we have things that we're not currently aware of, but we can become aware of them. In an altered state of consciousness, there are changes in mental processing that's sufficient for either ourselves or others to be aware of. In waking consciousness, we typically have a baseline against which altered states are compared. Now, humans really do have a biological clock. It's dictated by circadian rhythms. Sleep and other biological process have this circadian rhythm, and it cycles about every 24 hours. The biological clock that we have, if you're curious, is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it is our biological clock. Sleep is one such altered state of consciousness. We're going to spend a few minutes on sleep because then we're going to be talking about dreaming. There are 5 stages to sleep. In the first 2 stages, we are relaxed, our eyes are typically closed, but we're still awake. We're drifting into sleep. In stage 3 and 4, which is called slow wave sleep, we breathe deeply while showing a calm heartbeat and low blood pressure. A person in the deepest stage of slow wave sleep, which is stage 4, is really, really hard to wake up. The last stage of sleep is rapid eye movement, REM. We've all heard of REM. Sometimes it's called paradoxical sleep because it looks like we're awake because we have a fast EEG, we have a fast pulse, our breathing is fairly rapid, and our blood pressure goes up. Our eyelids are closed, but the eyes move. We've all seen this. If you have a dog or a cat or even a sleeping baby, you'll see their eyes move under their closed eyelids. Muscle tone decreases to virtual paralysis. In REM sleep, it's really, really hard to move. Now, the sleep cycle, there are 4 during a typical sleep stage. There are 4 to 6. They are 90 minutes long, and they typically have a pattern of stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2 REM. Deep sleep, which is stage 3 and 4, dominates early in the night or daytime if you're a day sleeper. And stage 2 and REM sleep dominates later in the sleep cycle. I'm going to quickly name some sleep disorders because our sleep can be disturbed. Insomnia, we all know what insomnia is. You're tired during the day or you have trouble falling asleep at night. Narcolepsy is a condition where you go from being wide awake and without warning into REM sleep. It's quite dangerous. Sleep apnea, I have sleep apnea, I'm very familiar with this. A person will briefly but repeatedly stop breathing during the night. A CPAP machine is typically prescribed for somebody with sleep apnea, and it helps them maintain sleep. Sudden infant death syndrome, probably the most disastrous of all sleep disorders. An infant suddenly dies. I had an older brother that I never met because he was a SIDS baby. My mother laid him down to sleep for a nap in the afternoon, and when she went back to wake him up, he was gone. It was devastating to my parents. Now, of course, I wasn't there, but I've heard the family legends and lores. Interestingly, our younger son, Zachary, was very nearly a SIDS baby. When he was 2 weeks old, he stopped breathing, and fortunately, we were able to wake him up. We took him to the hospital. He stopped breathing again with the doctor, and Zachary was hospitalized for a couple of weeks in the natal ICU, but most people in our church have met Zachary. He's a grown man now and everything turned out fine. But sleep apnea is really, really bad. Sleepwalking is when a person who is asleep, they walk, they move, they may eat, and there's a myth that you shouldn't wake a sleepwalker. Absolutely false. Go ahead and wake them up and tell them to go back to bed. Interestingly enough, this can be carried on to activities like driving. I once had a student who told me he lived out in the Midwest where there were great big acreage farms and the roads were quite deserted, and he woke up one day, or one night rather, about 20 miles from his house. He had actually gotten in his truck and driven 20 miles and had no recollection of it whatsoever. Night terrors are most common in boys. These are horrific dreams. The child may scream, they may flail about while they're still asleep. Um, Sleep terrors are often paired with sleepwalking, and like sleepwalking, sleep terrors are considered a sleep disorder. It's an undesired occurrence. The child is, or the, it's rare in adults, but it can happen. The person who is experiencing sleep terrors is hard to wake up. Why? Because they're typically in stage 4 sleep. About 40% of children have this disorder, but most of them grow up and grow out of it by the time they're adults. Sleep terrors may require treatment if they cause problems significant enough that the child is not getting enough sleep or there's a safety risk. Now, in a nightmare, which is not the same thing, the person having that dream will wake up and they may remember details. A person who has sleep terror remains asleep until they're woken up, and it's quite difficult. Children usually don't remember anything about their sleep terrors in the morning. Adults may recall a dream fragment, but children usually don't remember anything. REM behavior disorder. This is a tough one. The person moves about as if they're acting out their dream. Now, this is paradoxical because in REM sleep, you are virtually paralyzed. You don't move. In REM sleep disorder, you do move. You thrash around. It can be quite dangerous to the person who may be sleeping with you. Sometimes drug treatment will help. Sleep deprivation, which is not getting enough sleep, may be the primary cause in about 25% of automobile accidents. And if you're sleep deprived and you're a student, it makes learning harder. In REM sleep, the brain shuts off the norepinephrine producing neurons in the locus coeruleus. This is detailed, I know, but it's important to note this resets the suprachiasmatic nucleus, so our biological clock is reset, and then daytime sensitivity norepinephrine is important to being wakefully alert. Now, REM sleep is particularly important because it helps develop and test brain connections. It solidifies the things we have learned before we went to bed. So, those are some of the sleep disorders, certainly not all of them, but I hope you get a flavor of what I'm talking about. Let's move on to dreams and dreaming. Now, the brain never shuts off, so some brain activity during sleep is experienced as a dream. Our daytime activities seem to have only a minor influence on the dream content we have. And there's something called lucid dreaming. You can actually learn to control your dreams. You can control what you dream about, and you can dream about something that you want to. This is called lucid dreaming. Our dreams, although we dream at all times throughout the night, they occur mostly during REM sleep. They can last for just a few seconds or many minutes, and despite being senseless, dreams will oftentimes contain some sort of logic. Our dreams may be organized, or they could be bizarre or chaotic, and sometimes our dreams will offer us a creative solution to problems that we've been facing. And everybody, even blind people, dream every night. If you say, I didn't dream last night, that's just because you don't remember them. How you remember a dream depends on how you sleep and when you wake up. Some people believe that Satan or demons infiltrate our minds during nightmares, but there's no passage in the Bible that is directly uh, substantiating that. Our family had an interesting situation one time when Zachary was about 8 years old. For 4 or 5 days in a row, now we lived in Florida, and alligators were a real thing down there. He dreamed that there were alligators in his room, and he would wake up. It wasn't a night terror because he would wake up. It was a nightmare. And at the time, I was acting as the coach for Zachary's little league team. And of course, we woke up. The whole house woke up because he's screaming bloody murder. And finally, after 3 or 4 nights, I had had enough. And I said, Zachary, are you awake? And I went over to the closet where he had his baseball bat and his glove. And I took that baseball bat and I beat the living daylights out of everything in his room. I beat up his toy box. I beat up underneath his bed. I beat up everything. And I looked at him and I said, Zachary, Daddy has killed all the alligators. You can sleep without any problems. And you never had another dream about alligators. Freud, Sigmund Freud, who we've spoken about earlier, and psychodynamic psychologists who followed Freud argued that dreams are a disguised form of wish fulfillment. In other words, in our dreams, we can do things that we would otherwise not be able to do. If we have a dream about punching out our boss, well, that's wish fulfillment according to Freud and his followers. We really can't punch out our boss. There's too many things involved in that would be detrimental to our well-being. But dreams seem to be fundamental to all mammalian activity. All mammals dream. Whales dream, dolphins dream, doggies dream, cats dream, and people dream. Our dreams consolidate learning that appears to be of high value personally or survival. One theory of why we dream is called the activation synthesis theory, and this is because the brain never turns off, so the brain tries to organize these random nerve firings that's going on during REM sleep, and it tries to put them together in some way. This is why in our dreams the sky can be purple and the grass can be orange. It doesn't have to make sense. Our brain is simply trying to organize whatever's happening in the brain. The activation information model tells us that the pons, which is the right below the brain, as part of the brain stem, will use information that's been accessed earlier in the day and then try to explain random nerve firings to give meaning to the dreams. Now, my wife has come up with her own explanation of why we have weird dreams, and she calls it the pizza dream theory. If you eat too much pepperoni pizza before you go to bed, all that spicy pepperoni causes you to have strange dreams. It makes sense to me. Last thing I want to talk about before we move on and get away from all the scientific stuff are psychoactive drugs. Psychoactive drugs will affect our brain and change our consciousness and other physiological processes. So, now, what does the Bible tell us about consciousness? The word consciousness appears in the Bible one time. Arguably, the idea of consciousness is made up by humans, but what is consciousness? When we talk about consciousness, I need to know exactly what you're talking about before I can provide you with an answer from the Bible. But the idea of consciousness is an assumed thing in the Bible. If we are not conscious, then Bible questions and biblical statements really don't make very much sense. In Deuteronomy 30, verses 19 through 21, God calls us to choose life. If humans are not self-aware, if we're not conscious, then what in the world would this even mean? The idea of consciousness is an underlying unstated assumption without which the very idea of religion and justice and redemption and salvation don't even have any real meaning. Uh, as I said, the word conscious appears only once in the Bible. Hebrews 10 and 2 says, "For then would they not have ceased to be offered? For the worshippers, once purified, would have had no more consciousness of this." But as I said, the Bible implies consciousness over 100 times. Examples include Genesis 3 and 7, where we read, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked." Now, how did they know? They had to be conscious of something. "And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings." In Judges 20 and 34, we see, "And 10,000 select men from all Israel came against Gibeah, and the battle was fierce. But the Benjamites did not know that disaster was upon them." How did the Benjamites know? They had to be aware of something. Acts 20:29 says this, "For I know this, that after my departure savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock." How did he know? What was he aware of? Romans 1:19, "Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them." How were they aware? What did God show them? So, what can we learn from what the Bible implies about consciousness? Human consciousness is part of being made in the image of God. We see this in Genesis 1:27. One aspect of image bearing is that the man is capable of self-awareness and objective thinking. Human consciousness is distinct from the self. We see this in Romans 12 and 2. Our conscious thoughts are something other than our own selves, and we are aware of this distinction. Human beings can deliberately influence their own thoughts and perspectives. We retain some level of control over these things, or at least we can deliberately seek to change them. Human consciousness is perceived only by the individual in God. We see this in 1 Samuel 16 and 7, 1 Corinthians 2 and 11. An enormous barrier to scientific study of consciousness is that it cannot be directly measured or observed. It can only be subjectively reported by the consciousness itself. So, no human being can ever know with absolute certainty what another person is feeling or thinking. This is a fundamental reason to be cautious when attempting to judge other people. We see this in Romans 14:4 and John 7:24. Human consciousness is an integrated part of the whole. Matthew 22:37 tells us this. While Scripture is implicitly distinctive between mind, body, soul, spirit, intellect, the heart, and so forth, all of these are meant to be entirely focused on the will of God. So far as our daily lives are concerned, we are fine-tuned to distinctions between these which are irrelevant. All that we are and all that which we can control should be submitted to God to the best of our ability. The relationship between soul, spirit, mind, and body includes the human consciousness, and it's indescribably complex. The existence of consciousness, at least our own individual consciousness, is impossible to deny. When philosopher René Descartes attempted to create an absolute starting point for all of human knowledge, he started with his own human consciousness. This is quite famous. Most of us probably know this. But Descartes, in describing himself, he said, "I think consciousness. Therefore I am. The Bible may not give us details on the nature of consciousness, but it accurately reflects ideas that our experience confirms. That's it for today's topic. I hope you have learned something. I hope it was enjoyable to at least a few people. I know it was a bit long, but there's an awful lot about it that we need to know to understand. How do we relate to God? How do we know who God is? We have to be aware. We have to be conscious in order to do so. May God richly bless you today. Have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.